Keith, I'm so glad that you decided to follow and go deep on the story that we're about to discuss, because it hadn't come to my attention. It happened last fall, and it started last fall, and it's so interesting. And I'm really glad it caught your eye and that you wrote it up at your wonderful blog, The Associate's Mind. It has to do with a journalist. What is his name again?
Kurt Eichenwald.
Kurt Eichenwald. Who does he write for? And before we get into this in detail and talk about all what happened to him, et cetera, what did he write that triggered this, that kicked it off?
Kurt right now, or Eichenwald, writes for, I believe, Newsweek currently at the moment. Mm-hmm. And he is a very left-leaning journalist and was very vehemently anti-Trump and took very anti-Trump positions in all his writing, which, obviously anyone who paid attention online in the past few months, it was a very, let's say, caustic environment on social media in the past few months regarding the election. Mm-hmm. And because Eichenwald was very present, he has a very active Twitter account and tweets often. He attracted the attention and ire of Trump supporters who, and I guess the alt-right sort of group people, and or the new right, whatever they want to identify as. And as that happened, it just brought him a lot of negative attention, and which resulted in the current situation.
So these facts, and we still haven't told you what they are yet. I promise we will. But my other take on this whole saga unfolding is, I'm sure that law professors are already, taking furious notes, and this has probably already been incorporated into somebody's tort exam somewhere, because it smacks just of all the cases that you're taught in law school where your head wants to explode because you can't really imagine a court having to sort through all of these details and come to a conclusion. It seems like, this could never happen, but it does, and the courts have to make law based on this. So the wild card fact here that we haven't told you yet about Kurt Eichenwald is that he is an epileptic, and I guess a very publicly known epileptic. This is a thing known about him. So when things started getting bitter and nasty on Twitter, someone decided to try and harm him by sending him an animated GIF of flashing images of the kind that can trigger an epileptic seizure. The first time this happened, it was bad news. It was mean, but no, he didn't suffer any personal harm. Is that right, Keith?
Right. Yeah. So it happened one time. So how it came out is Eichenwald's a very well-known epileptic, and then people started to send him. There's actually a term, I'm going to butcher it. It's epileptic-genic, I believe, style image, which is just an image flashing, strobing that causes epilepsy. And he got it the first time, but it was to the side. It didn't bother him in a certain fashion, and it was not a big deal. And then he wrote a story about it, actually, like, people are actually trying to harm me. And then about a month later, so he alleges is that he was at home and received a message from a Twitter user that was one of these style images with the really bright strobing and flashing, and then across the image, it also stated, "You deserve a seizure." And so he got it. He said it caused him to have a seizure, and he was laid out for a little bit. His wife immediately jumped on to his Twitter account like an hour or two later and said, this happened. And then the next day, Eichenwald got on and
tweeted right to the guy who did it and said, This is his wife. You caused a seizure. I have your information and have called the police to report the assault. So, Keith, you've had a series of 3 posts about this now. And in response to one of them, someone enlightened you, and you in turn have enlightened me, and I'm sure others, that it is possible for someone to die of an epileptic seizure. So we're not just talking about inconveniencing or hurting someone. We're talking about potentially killing them.
Yeah, it was brought to my attention actually by something. Maybe if we have time, we'll talk about later. Another lawyer in my Slack group brought up the fact that, actually, some epileptics, depending upon the severity of this type of seizures they receive and how it happens, there are essentially like sudden death occurrences that happen from seizures, and it can cause really serious injury for people. So for Eichenwald, he said he's all in. He filed the complaint with the police department, and then he also filed a civil suit. And the issue here was, of course, the Twitter user who sent him the offending tweet was obviously anonymous, and there was going to be a big fight. They filed a special type of pre-litigation filing to do discovery regarding Twitter to say, all right, well, we want to try and find out who this guy is. And Twitter accepted service and said, we'll agree to expedited service, which was really interesting because generally speaking, Twitter has always been very good about protecting the rights and anonymity of its users. And in this situation, they might have agreed to expedited service just in order to go ahead and get on with it, but they said they weren't objecting to it. They'll agree to expedite service. Go ahead and get it to us, and we'll respond to your written depositions, and let's just go. So that was a little unusual. But then the anonymous Twitter user made a special John Doe appearance and said, "Okay, no, you don't actually have the correct jurisdiction over me. This is incorrect. It's not the right court jurisdiction to come and get me." And everything was proceeding along, and they were set to have a hearing on it. And then out of the blue, Eichenwald's attorneys filed another motion saying, "We're done. Actually, we know who this guy is. Don't worry about it." And that's kind of where we're at right now. Is nothing's happened. That's been about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks at this point, since Eichenwald last filed that motion, or his attorneys filed that motion, stating the fact that, okay, we know who this guy is. We don't need to go to Twitter anymore. We found out who this guy is.
We've unmasked him, which means
which
they
is
are
like how.
Yeah.
That's my big question is how. They said we're going to have to go through this whole process to figure him out, and then they said, "Oh no, we're done. Don't worry about it." I mean.
It could be any number of ways, right? They could have hired a private investigator who was pretty good. They could have started canvassing all this person's followers or people they were following and seeing if someone would rat them out. And apparently, one way or another, they figured out who it was. I mean, they seem fairly confident from what you're saying that they know who and where the person is. And so, as you said, there's a civil suit and the police are involved. So whatever local police would have to be brought in to actually, as you said in one of your posts, this transforms from sending someone, the fact that you're not allowed to assault people, certainly not deadly assault people. It changes something from sending someone a flashing GIF on the internet to the FBI knocking on your door. So,
right, yeah, it's a little different. The thing is with the criminal suit. I mean, where Eichenwald lives and initially filed both the criminal and where he made his criminal complaint and then also filed the civil suit was in Dallas. So he filed the complaint with the Dallas Police Department. Then it's up, obviously, to the discretion of the prosecutors of the Dallas County whether or not to pursue it. My thought was, I don't really see a Dallas prosecutor being like, "Wait, what happened? No, I got time. We've got other stuff. We've got real crimes." I'm not inclined to think any type of criminal proceedings are really going to go anywhere. If it's going to happen, it's going to be on Eichenwald's own dime, him trying to pursue a civil suit, tracking this guy down, which he, again, says he has this guy's information, whether he got it through a PI or through, online investigation, however he got his information. I feel like that's probably the only way he has any legs on this, because I just feel like a prosecutor is not going to be very sympathetic considering everything else they have to do, everything else that's on their plate on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, I tend to agree with you there. And I think our friend of the show, Mark Randazza, was of that opinion too, right? You had an exchange with him about the speech issues involved here and what's likely to happen.
Yeah, I spoke with Mark. Mark's another guy in the Slack group that we'll talk about later. But yeah, we went back and forth and we talked about it some. And yeah, he was the same opinion. To what you said earlier, his thought was like, law school, absolutely, this happens. If this is on an exam, absolutely, this is textbook assault, and this very, it ticks off the elements. It's the type of thing that if you were a law student in law school and you were to answer this as on an exam question, you would answer as an assault, and he would win. In the real world, are you going to convince a jury? What are Eichenwald's damages? Is the first big question. Okay, you had a seizure, and you were inconvenienced for a little bit in the evening, and maybe it startled you, and you had to lay down. But then, he was back to tweeting the next morning. I mean, how did it affect him in some way? Like, what are you going to go to a jury with to say that I deserve, X amount of dollars for the inconvenience of this? I mean, I just don't see that like there's a lot of money there. The real thing that my speculation was, but Eichenwald hasn't done it yet, was he did all this to dox the guy, to unmask the anonymous Twitter user and just roast him in public, be like, look what this guy did. But he hasn't done that yet. So, who knows what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting to follow along with. I suspect if he doesn't do what you just suggested, maybe just filed the lawsuit in order to expose and shame the guy publicly. I suspect he'd be able to cobble together a damages argument. Maybe there was medical care involved, at least temporary loss of ability to work. It wouldn't have to be much.
Right. Yeah.
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 Just enough to support the lawsuit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he could get something together, but it's not something like he's going to get a lot of money out of it or anything like that. I mean, if he really is into it and wants to pursue it, I would imagine it's more he's doing it for the principle of the thing, to be like, look, this is a good chance for me to go in and demonstrate a bad situation, and there's an ability to make some case law and to show people online that, like, hey, this type of behavior has consequences, right? It's like, oh, it's not all fun and games on Twitter where you can go on and just, harass people nonstop.
Right.
Some people are going to fight back.